Right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Alyssa, and the whole Egg West Village team for bringing me out. Really happy to be back here. Great to see some new familiar faces. So I graduated from Egg about a year ago. Hard to believe, it's been just over a year. Transitioned to my current job in January. But I'm going to talk really more about my career leading up to that point, leading into Egg, and then a little bit about what I've learned coming out of grad school. What are the skills that I found most helpful that I learned in grad school and honed in grad school, and then a little bit about why you might want to consider careers in public policy. So I don't have a lot of slides, and I'm definitely not going to wow you with any of these. There's no funny PowerPoint transitions, but I just thought it'd be helpful to have a couple visual aids as I talk through, so you're not trying to, reconstruct my history in your mind. I just thought I'd have some really simple kind of explanations on here so folks can follow along and hear about each individual step without having to think about where I was at different points. So I started in a completely different field. I didn't know anything about politics, who my local representatives were, public policy, energy. I wasn't exactly sure what PG&E did in college. I kind of figured that out as I had to start paying bills. I think like many people, I was just like a clueless consumer. As I was going through my undergraduate at UC Davis, I started focusing more on economics and getting interested in things like externalities, environmental concerns, how that fit into institutions, business, etc. But I still really didn't have any sense that I would be in the policy sphere. But as I was going through my program, I ended up connecting with folks who had worked in the state capitol in Sacramento. That's one of the real luxuries we have here in Davis is the proximity. And I was able to do a postgraduate fellowship in the state capitol immediately after graduating. Something that I would encourage all of you to explore. It's such a great opportunity, whether it's in DC, in Sacramento, whether you're coming out of undergrad, grad school, law school, whatever you're doing, it's an amazing opportunity. So I just really happened to fall into a public policy role where I was, as a clueless 23-year-old who literally knew nothing, reviewing public policy proposals for all sorts of issues that the state legislator I was working for was going to vote on. I was completely and utterly unqualified for this position, as were many of my colleagues doing the same thing. And if that doesn't terrify you about the state of our government today, it should. But it's also an opportunity for everyone to know that, as a rule, governments are understaffed, and there's always opportunities for people who are young and eager to learn and sort of ready to shift in their career. So I got placed in this position reviewing bills on all kinds of things. We did public safety, we did family law, we did health, insurance, energy, climate, environmental quality, all of these different issues that, again, completely and utterly unqualified. But through that process, in that 2-year period, I was able to learn a tremendous amount, particularly about what the state of California is doing around energy and climate. So that was an era where we were implementing the cap and trade program. We were revising and expanding things like net metering, energy efficiency. We were developing the renewable portfolio standard. Each of these items was coming through the state capitol as a bill and then going to regulatory agencies and the utilities and other stakeholders for implementation. And I consider that to be the most valuable stop that I've had. Was this, totally unqualified, paid almost nothing, overworked, no work-life balance, but nothing could have better prepared me, I think, for the career I have now than having that moment where I stopped and got to see sort of how the wheels of government turn and come together. So I worked in that position for 2 years. The legislator I worked for tried to run for mayor of a major city. That didn't work out, but in that process, he decided he wasn't able to also run for another term in the legislature. He left office, and I was out of a job. It's another bonus of working with the legislature. When your member turns out, you're out, you need to go looking for a job. But I had a great opportunity through all the work that I had done in the Capitol on energy and climate issues. I'd gotten to know all the stakeholders. So I'd gotten to meet the utilities, the stakeholders like NRDC and EDF. I got to meet all the solar developers, all of the different stakeholders you might think of as engaging in the policy community in Sacramento. And through that process, I had this great opportunity to work for Southern California Edison. I think you guys have probably, if not maybe in this course itself, heard from SCE people. I'm sure they've come through. The utilities are really present here in the West Village and involved, particularly on customer programs, energy efficiency. That was a really tremendous experience for me to get a little bit more narrowly focused on energy and climate issues. So when I was a legislative staffer, I had every possible issue. Somebody might come knocking on my door to talk to me about it. In this position, I really got to focus a lot more on the electric sector, and thinking about, for instance, how a public policy that gets passed in law might get implemented by the utility. So thinking about how the procurement team, which is responsible for selecting energy resources, might implement the RPS bill, or might think about the emissions constraints and requirements that are developed through law or regulation, or might proactively think, hey, maybe we shouldn't sign this contract for a coal plant or a dirty gas plant. Even though there may not be a law against it, people are not going to like it. We shouldn't continue to support that kind of thing. So kind of proactively thinking about how you integrate policy considerations into running a business. And I think that's what's really exciting and frankly somewhat unique about the electric sector. It's also true about natural gas. It's really heavily regulated in a way that really very few other industries are actually this responsive to policy considerations. I don't want to pretend the electric sector is perfect. We've all been following along for the last 6 months with wildfires, with all of the many concerns with the electric sector, the emissions associated with it, et cetera. But structurally, I would really distinguish it from almost any other industry you can think of whose real prime directive is just to sell more product. And I think that's a really exciting place for us to be, particularly given how integral this is to us responding to the climate challenge. I got a little bored after a couple of years of being a lobbyist. It's kind of weird and awkward at dinner parties or like in big groups to be like, hey, I'm a registered lobbyist. I know you guys are all waiting for that moment when you come home for Thanksgiving. But that said, it's a really cool job. Highly recommend it if you ever have the opportunity. I left SCE and joined UC Davis, actually in the Transportation Technology and Policy program. So this was before EGG existed. I knew EGG was an idea, but I didn't know, frankly, how close it was to coming to fruition. I was really happy and excited to hear towards the end of my first quarter and my second quarter that EGG was going to be an opportunity and I could shift gears from transportation and focus on energy. And I will just make one plug for TTP. I don't know if there's TTP folks in the room or not, but there is so much that I learned about the other side of climate on urban planning, vehicles, emissions from TTP. I would really encourage you all to take, if you ever get the chance to take the transportation modeling course. It was taught by Professor Heyer. I don't know who teaches it now. Really interesting learning about how local governments make energy decisions in the transportation sector that's hugely impactful for emissions and increasingly hugely impactful for electricity given the new integration. So strongly encourage those courses as well as some of the transportation policy courses taught by Professor Handy and Professor Sperling. I think you guys have to take the Sperling class now, so definitely take it as you have to, but it's a great way to learn about that other side of the challenge. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my master's deeper into this. I'll switch gears a little bit to talk about one really interesting opportunity I had while I was at Davis was to work at E3, the consulting firm in San Francisco. This was a really fortunate opportunity where I just happened to meet one of the E3 partners at an ITS event and got to talking to them, and through sitting with them at a dinner, ended up getting this opportunity, which took me from being a policy person who knows nothing to now in the eyes of the world, this like wizard of modeling from E3 based on the 3 months that I was there. It's incredible how much those external perceptions change with one little stop on the resume. But I share that anecdote to say, if you're at a conference, if you're at a meeting, say hello, introduce yourself, say, hey, so-and-so, I saw your blog post or your thing, and I would love to talk to you more about it. Those connections really matter when you guys get out of this. So be social, be friendly, be chatty, show interest. It really goes a long way. So I did that for 3 months. I thought very seriously about continuing to work at E3, but I came back actually to finish a master's degree in Ag Econ, which, as you can see by its omission on this page, never was completed. A couple months into that program, I had a job offer to work with CalCCA, and to my chagrin, didn't complete the last 3 courses that I needed to do, and was shown up by John in the back, who I pitched on ARE as a master's forever, and then I bailed and he actually completed it. Congrats to you, John, for that. Maybe someday I'll follow in your footsteps. I'll just spend a couple minutes on what I do now. So what I do now, I work for CalCCA. So CalCCA is a trade association. We're technically a nonprofit made up of local governments who are CCAs. You guys probably know what CCAs are at this point. But CCAs provide energy service, and they're exclusively very, very new organizations, very, much an institution building moment for the CCA community, where CalCCA is building itself as an institution, CCAs individually are building themselves as institutions. When I say that, I mean building up staff, building up internal processes, internal, modeling and procurement competencies, figuring out their policy positions on different issues, figuring out how they exist in this broader energy ecosystem. So it's a really exciting time for me at CalCCA to help all of our membership figure out, what does it mean to be a CCA? What are our obligations in the eyes of policymakers, commissioners, legislators, et cetera? What are our blind spots? What are the areas where people think we're doing great? What are the areas where people don't think we're doing so great? And how do I help my members develop themselves so that they are succeeding on those metrics and kind of gaining the trust and respect that they want to have from the broad policy community as they sort of blast onto the scene as they have in the last year. My role is kind of a little bit of everything. We're an association of 6 people, and when you're an association of 6 people, you have to be a generalist, kind of jack of all trades. So I do a mix of legislative and regulatory policy, more regulatory policy right now focused on resource planning and procurement, reliability. But I also do a lot of other stuff, like I work with an Ag Econ PhD student who we have on part-time doing data analysis work for us. I help organize our modeling and data collection and sort of what we find from the data, translating that back to how we might want to change our procurement behavior or activities, or sort of reflect on direction we might get from policymakers to do things that are more in line with what they'd like to see. So all that said, I do a little bit of everything, and I would encourage all of you on your career stop, work for somewhere really small. It may be hectic and crazy, but it's a really fun way to sort of experience a lot in one position, in a way that, for example, when I was at SCE in this huge bureaucracy of, I don't know, 11,000 people, had a very, very defined function. And that was great, but it didn't give me the same type of experience that I'm currently having at CalCCA. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what skills and sort of, what did I take from grad school? And I'm gonna tell you now, I didn't know there was any structure or concept around what I was taking from grad school at the time, but reflecting back, these are the kinds of things that I think are really valuable for me coming out of grad school, going into the work world. So I try to characterize these as sort of a balancing act of hard skills and soft skills. When I say hard skills, I'm talking about technical analysis. Frankly, 90% of the assignments you guys are probably doing as grad students. Most of your GSR work is probably largely, the grunt work of it is probably hard skills. But every single one of those assignments is packaged in a soft skill of a presentation, a report, communications with teammates who are also working on the project, etc. And I wanted to share my perspective on EGG as an interdisciplinary program is such an opportunity for all of you to go and really build both of these skills. What's really fantastic about EGG is you're going to do all of this work. In my ARE experience, I think that I took 5 or 6 classes, and I think that I never once made a presentation. John took the class where you have to make a presentation. I didn't get that far. I think in my EGG classes, probably 60–75% of my courses, I had projects where I worked with teammates, where I gave presentations, wrote reports, or I had to design and devise a project, an idea. That's what the real world is like. The real world isn't on rails. The real world is not you get an assignment and you carry it out. The real world is, here's a problem, go figure out a solution and tell me why you came to it, how you selected it, how you worked with your teammates, other stakeholders, etc. That's the real world that I think we all should be building on. But of course, to get to that answer, you need all the hard skills. You need the technical skills. You need intuition and analysis, sort of problem-solving skills. And so what I would encourage each of you to do is, rather than sort of flock to your natural space, if you're a hard skills person, rather than flock to, I'm going to really dig deep and go hard on technical stuff, do that, but don't do it at the omission of building up the soft skills. If you're in a class where you have an opportunity to be on a team or present, put yourself in that uncomfortable position of saying, actually, I'm going to be the project manager on this one, even though I haven't done that. That's a skill that I want to develop. Or I want to be the person who's going to communicate and check in with my teammates. Or I'm going to be the person that writes the report if I'm not the person who writes reports. There's no time in the future of your career where you can be really, really, really bad at something and say, hey, I want to do it to learn. You can have that a little bit, but there's nowhere like grad school to say, I'm really, really bad and I want to come out and be better at this. I want to be capable of doing this in the future. It's the perfect low stakes environment to hone those skills. If you're not a modeler on a group project, say, I'm going to do the data analysis this time. I might need some help. I might need to work with you and help, kind of refine this through the process. But don't think that you can go through life and have a successful career if you just have one of these. to put it in really dorky terms, think of it as a function. It's an optimization function, right? And the objective function is hard skills times soft skills. If either one of those is 0, you're not going to be very successful, right? So there's going to be a balance. They're not going to be equal, but think about how you maximize based on those two skill sets. And then I wasn't exactly sure how to frame this one, but one of the really important things that I took out of ag, and I think more broadly through my career, is that if you work in climate, really if you work anywhere, you have to hold in your mind this idea that we absolutely can do it, and that's why I'm showing up to work every day, that's why I'm coming with ideas, that's why I'm committing myself to this, but also knowing that the challenge is so massive in scope that we're absolutely going to fail, right? I know that every day. I think of that, both of those things at the same time 100 times a day. And I was initially thinking of this a little bit in a contrast, I would say, between my ag program and my ARE program. It both have a little bit of this. But I think in the world of the West Village, we live in the world of the possible. We live in the world of the green revolution and green jobs, and we can make it happen, and let's pursue, and policy and technology will save us. And if you go across the street, you go to the econ department, they say, here's why everything you said is wrong. I didn't even hear what you said, but it was wrong, and here are the 5 reasons for it. And I think both of those are incredibly valuable skills. If we just say, yes, we can do it, let's pass every bill we need to do, let's pass the Green New Deal, let's make it all happen. We'll have cap and trade and net metering and energy efficiency and all the great things. We're not going to get to a functional solution. But if you say, I really want to do something, I believe in all these things, and I want to get equity and social and environmental justice and decarbonization and economic development, all these things in one, and then you take that and you go to the everything will fill mentality, you start getting to a place where you can refine and define solutions that work. Right? So I would suggest, and I don't mean to say that either West Village is all optimism and econ is all skepticism, but I think if you could think of foils, it's a useful way to think about how are you going to make your career successful and not just be a true believer in everything, all the good stuff, or a hater on everything, right? Find the balance and think about what's going to make you need to believe to come to work every day and commit yourself to this, but also don't forget how big this challenge is. I think I'm going way over my time here, so I might just add one more comment on this. So throughout, one of the most valuable things that I think I took out of both my career in the legislature and also in grad school is to be a skeptic about everybody who comes to you is trying to pitch you on something. I've been in this room and I've been pitched on things. Many of you have too. Maybe later I'll pitch you on CCAs and how great they are. You all should hear that and say, I'm not going to say the word, you should hear that and say, here's why I don't believe you. Here are all the things you're telling me that are consistent with your, your incentives and goals, and here's all the things that I think you're probably omitting that we need to scratch the surface on. And I think that's the role of an academic, of a thought leader, of anyone in any institution or organization, is to figure out what are those surfaces that you need to scratch to see what the upsides and the downsides of something are. Whether you're in a business and someone's trying to sell you a new product or pitch you on an investment, or you're in a policy office and someone's pitching you on a bill idea or a proposal, you need to say, what's missing from this pitch and how do I get there? And CCAs are great. Okay, and I think with that, I'll leave it. I'll leave it here. So we can talk more about that later if folks have questions. I'll turn it over.
So I started off at Davis in fall of 2011 as a biomedical engineering student. About a year into it, I realized I didn't like chemistry, I didn't like biology. I actually volunteered at the UC Davis Hospital in Sacramento, and it was a pediatric ER, the midnight shift, and some pretty crazy stuff. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you some of these stories, but just imagine a branch through the thigh. So I figured, I can't do this, so I wanted to change to something that I was a little bit more interested in. So I switched over to electrical engineering. Again, really didn't know what I was getting into, but took a chance there. And at the same time, I was actually working as a Unitrans driver at Davis. I started at the end of my freshman year, and I'd always loved cars, loved driving, loved vehicles, and figured, hey, it might be cool to drive a bus. So I signed up for that. Did that for about a year, and I'll be honest, it was really fun. But it was just a lot of hours, like 20 to 25 hours a week and taking away from my class time. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more geared towards the career path I wanted to follow. So I ended up quitting and got a call from one of my friends in January 2014 saying that she just transferred to Davis and she started working at a place called the Energy Efficiency Center. I never heard of it, but she said they were looking for student interns to help on a project called Prop 39. So I went ahead and took it and moved forward without knowing what I was getting myself into. And I have to say, it's probably one of the best decisions of my life because it really set me up for where I am now over the past several years of it. I'll get a little bit more into my time at the EEI soon, but just to continue, I applied for an internship at Walmart that Mr. Finklor helped me get connected to, and moved to Walmart in June of 2015. Started my internship there and continued on there. And I have a funny story about that too that I'll get into later. So at the Energy Efficiency Institute, or what was back then the EEC, I worked on two major projects. I don't know if you all are familiar with them, but there was Prop 39, which was funding for California K-12 public schools for research and implementation of energy conservation measures. I believe we were tasked with receiving all the ASHRAE audit data from the California Conservation Corps and ingesting the data, processing it, and coming up with recommendations for these schools to follow. And with the MTLC project, it was geared towards multi-tenant lighting commercial buildings, so strip malls. And we were supposed to run those through simulations to figure out how we can apply energy conservation measures to strip malls. So my role in both projects was pretty similar. It was really software automation. I didn't get too into the nitty-gritty as far as the actual energy calculations and the algorithms behind it. But I developed the automation process so that we could, for Prop 39, crunch several hundred reports. Ben, do you know how many reports we ended up doing for Prop 39?
Close to 1,000.
Yeah, so close to 1,000. And I think, initially when we started, we realized that we couldn't do this one by one. There's just too much data, too many schools, and not enough manpower. So we automated the whole process from reading the data to creating the report, and it was pretty successful. And with the MTLC project, it was a user interface software that was built for the strip mall owners to input their building data, run it through an Energy Plus model. I don't know if you're all familiar with Energy Plus, but it's all simulations. Nick, you said you worked with simulations quite a bit, so you probably know a lot about it. No?
I pretended to work for simulation
And
for a while.
okay. I've been doing the same, so that's fine. We came up with energy conservation measure recommendations for these strip mall owners. So, there's really two things that I took away from my time and my projects here at the EEI. Number one, established a fundamental knowledge of energy. I really didn't understand energy to begin with. Even though I was an electrical engineer, you always had a narrow view from your classes and your coursework, and really working here, seeing the real life issues that are going on out there helped understand the broader picture of what's going on, where there are opportunities. And dealing with these K-12 public schools and all these strip malls really showed me how old a lot of our building infrastructure is and how inefficient the equipment is, how inefficient the building envelopes are, and how much opportunity there is to make improvements. So about halfway through my senior year at Davis, I got a call from Ben Finklor. He asked me to come into his office and he asked me if I was interested in interning for Walmart. Walmart had an energy department apparently, which I didn't know of back then. And they were looking for an intern to help them with some work in baselining energy consumption for their fleet of US stores. So, it sounded really interesting. I was definitely underqualified for it, but I figured I'd apply, why not? And then Ben dropped the bomb on me that if I wanted to intern at Walmart, I'd have to move to Bentonville, Arkansas. Yeah. I hadn't even heard of Bentonville, Arkansas. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, but if you asked me back then where Arkansas was on the map, I'd probably tell you like it's here, but I couldn't tell you exactly where it was. And it's quite sad because a lot of my friends who grew up in California are the same way. So I don't know if that's a California thing or just people associate themselves with me. But so I went ahead and took a chance. I didn't have any intention of moving out there, but I applied and I got it. And long story short, early June, I was on I-40 on a road trip to Bentonville, Arkansas. And it was interesting, you know, it was a culture shock getting there, and but it wasn't what you would expect. You know, I had a lot of preconceived notions of what the South would be like, what people would be like, what the environment would be like, and it was completely different. People were extremely nice, just a great work culture in Walmart, and I mean, it was a chance that I feel like if I didn't take, it wouldn't have opened up all these different opportunities. And that's one thing that I think everyone should kind of lead with is sometimes things may not be all that appealing to start off with. They may seem out of the ordinary, that you might have to go out of your comfort zone to a place that is different, that you're not used to. But oftentimes there's such a huge opportunity associated with that you can't see initially. But if you think about the big picture and have that motivation to grow, then it's going to be a good decision regardless. So I did a summer internship at Walmart, you know, worked on the statistical analysis of the historical energy data. Here's my car that I loaded up from Davis in my apartment up at Greystone. I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but it's on 5th Street. And it took about 30 hours to get there. And it was an interesting time because it was before finals, so I had to take all my finals over the phone or like on a Zoom planner or something. So we did an energy analysis to determine how the performance of the fleet was. You know, what the expected energy use intensity is for the stores and what they actually were. And we did that by doing a regression model, comparing stores based on a variety of parameters. And it was interesting, there was a lot of sister stores which were in the same geographic region, which had very similar characteristics, same vintage, same equipment, but their energy performance was completely different. And this was very common. You know, we have a lot of different types of stores, a lot of different legacy footprints, and they were just all over the place. And disclaimer, this is not the actual graph of the data. I can't share that, but this is just an example of how it looked like. So, you know, that internship really got me thinking, wow, the opportunity that I saw at UC Davis of all these buildings out there and how old they are and what type of energy consumption they can achieve was just tripped. It was just magnified because there's 5,500 stores here. There's so many stores that are using a ridiculous amount of energy, and there's a huge, huge opportunity for saving money, for helping the environment, and for just running your equipment more efficiently so that they don't fail early. So I decided that I wanted to stick with Walmart, and I went from not knowing what Bentonville was to signing an offer to move there full time. So between my time at Bentonville and, between my summer internship at Bentonville and me officially moving there full time, I had a quarter to finish at Davis, so I moved back here, and I was working remotely for Walmart while finishing up a few units. And it was cool projects, but right before I was going to move back, I got a call from my boss saying that there were layoffs and my job was gone. So that was pretty crazy. I don't know if Ben knows that, but yeah, it's I got a call saying that the roles were cut and there's nothing they can do about it because it's corporate America. And I mean, I get it now. I mean, it's a big company, and he said what he had to. And trust me, I'm really good friends with him now. We work very closely together, so it's all good. There's no bad blood. But it was pretty heartbreaking at that time because I put all my eggs in one basket and really wanted to go in this direction. So I didn't want to take no for an answer. I flew there the next day and talked to HR, talked to senior leadership, and I was like, look, I've tried to prove my value. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, and I want to come work for this company. Just find a role for me and just put me in that role. So they found a coordinator role, you know, it was definitely a much lower pay band. And there was no real job description. I'd still be working on what I was set out to be working on, but it was, you know, nothing against a coordinator role at all. I mean, it's an extremely important role, but after graduating as an electrical engineer, I had a different idea of where I wanted to be at starting my career. So I went ahead and took a chance on that and took the role, and 6 months later, got promoted, and it's just been a good journey ever since. And the reason I'm telling you all that is because, again, it's a chance that you have to take sometimes. Not everything seems good on the surface. Oftentimes, you really have to dig deep to understand what the true opportunity is. And coming out of school doesn't always mean trying to land the highest paying job, right? Oftentimes you need to go a direction and set yourself up for a larger scale of success. And I didn't know that at the time, right? I was just kind of doing what I was doing because I put all my eggs in one basket. It turned out well, but that's just one piece of advice that I'd give to all of you. So in my career at Walmart, I had a few different roles. After the coordinator role, I worked as an engineering design manager. And this wasn't too much geared towards energy, but it had some energy components in it. We have a remodel program that hits about 500 stores a year where we introduce new initiatives, new merchandising initiatives, compliance initiatives, safety, operational improvements, and energy efficiency improvements. And so we were incorporating things like our new electronics section, our new self-checkout machines, our pickup towers for e-commerce. And it was really interesting working with all the different folks out there in the different departments and establishing those connections. So echoing what Nick was saying, get out there, talk to people. It doesn't matter if you don't directly work with them. It's really important to make those connections. If you're chatty, all the better. I mean, there might be one or two people that say, oh, you're annoying, but who cares? I mean, that happened to me, so. But it's really worth it at the end because those connections, meeting people, and for me, a lot of it was internal to the organization, but for a lot of other roles in the energy sector, there's just so many external connections, especially in the public sector and even in the private sector. So for all these initiatives, we had to do a lot of energy calculations to figure out how it's going to impact our bottom line. So that's my way of tying that role back to energy. This is pretty interesting too over here. This is actually a power station for trucks, refrigeration trucks that carry all of our refrigerated goods. California, I think, led one of the initiatives to stop diesel idling. And so we were, and the rest of the country is slowly following. So we were tasked to come up with a way to keep these trucks powered so that they can keep the refrigerated product cold without using diesel fuel. So that's a prototype that was worked on. There's sub-metering that we've been installing in the stores. So moved on from here to a more energy efficiency geared role, where I managed our LED retrofit program for Walmart and Sam's Club. So this one was a really interesting role because it involved a lot of interfacing with internal stakeholders, with consultants, with vendors, with contractors. It wasn't just finding the best product out there and getting it installed. It was really evaluating the whole landscape of what's out there, working with the vendors to push their innovation, to push how much energy they could save, to push the technology they're incorporating into the lights, and working with the finance folks on developing different business models to understand how it's going to impact our bottom line, whether we have money for this or not, and working with the design folks as well to make sure that these lights meet our design specifications, that they're providing enough light in all the different parts of the store and that it's calm light that's not going to hurt people's eyes. So that was a really cool experience, that I definitely was not qualified for, but just put myself out there, and it was really interesting. So if you have any opportunities on projects that you don't really know anything about, but it sounds interesting, I would just say take it. Take it or think seriously about it, because oftentimes it'll lead to something else, especially if you kind of put yourself out there, talk to different folks, and network and build that project the way you want to build it. So now my latest role is in asset digitization strategy. So, and I feel like I'm talking about myself a lot, but that's the only way I know how to connect the dots to where I can see some growth on here. So, everything's moving towards IoT. The IoT space is incredibly huge right now. And I think it's often understated how important IoT is in energy and facility maintenance. And I'm always going to talk about the two together, energy and facilities maintenance, because I truly believe that they are a combined effort. In the end, an asset is an asset, and the way it operates and the energy efficiency of that asset relates to how that asset's maintained over time and how it's performed. So, we're a pretty old company. We have stores out there that are 30, 40 years old. We have refrigeration systems, refrigeration controllers that are 20, 25 years old. I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you that, but they're freaking old. And we're not collecting the right data. There's a lot of inefficiencies in how they operate. I mean, racks go down on a daily basis, and we don't have the right telemetry data that in order to identify these issues and fix them. And it's not only for our bottom line, but it's really customers who rely on Walmarts to shop and to get their groceries. If their store is down or if their refrigeration racks are down, then you have to throw out the food. You can't sell that product to them. And they, a lot of times in small towns where Walmart's really the hub of where they get stuff, they can't get groceries. So refrigeration really kicked off this whole effort. And we found so many other areas that digitizing our asset is going to provide its business value. You know, like it's a pretty basic illustration, but we have our vestibule doors that open and close. We have our meat and deli slicers. We have waste oil tanks in our auto care center and grease well traps for our kitchen and deli equipment. There's just a whole bunch of equipment out there that's running in each one of these stores that, you know, if it goes down, it's a cost and it's also an operational impact and a sales impact. So the initiative right now is to pull together all the assets, digitize them, and not digitize them in the way that we're relying on vendors to do all the work, but digitizing them in a way where we receive all the data. I feel like I'm getting a little too technical into it, but it's really a strategy that we're defining that a lot of folks out there are not doing yet. And I feel like if you're going to be moving forward in the energy space, it's really important to bridge that gap between the business side, the operations side, and the technology side. You know, even though I'm an electrical engineer, I was never too into the technical details. I did some programming here and there. I worked with hardware here and there, but having that fundamental foundation, I think, is extremely important. And then as you learn more about the business side and tying everything together, you know, like Nick said earlier, it's not, even if you want to roll everything out, like the Green New Deal, like all these different initiatives that are being proposed, it's not that easy to just go and move forward with it. There's a whole business component. There's the operational component. How is this going to impact daily lives of the folks who are going to be impacted by these initiatives? And I really think that keeping your mind open to the bigger picture and understanding these different areas, not getting too deep into all these areas, but again, being kind of a jack of all arts in all these areas is beneficial because it's going to help put you in a position of success just as your careers move forward. So, I mean, that's really all I have to say. Hope I didn't get too technical, but I hope this was beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a chance for you guys to ask questions of Nick and Sandesh.
So for me, one of the more interesting questions, it seems like personal life and decisions are pretty big in trying to decide careers. So what do you think might have been one of the biggest deciding factors between finding that balance? Because it seems like it's really hard to pick between, like, you were given an example of a well-paying job that really satisfies you, and then you have to relocate to somewhere like Arkansas, you know, just factors like that. Like for you all, what were the biggest determining factors to find that balance between a happy life and a work balance and sacrificing things and taking risks?
You want to start?
Sure. So, I'll sit down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like to think that I'm generally an optimist, and I'm open to a lot of opportunities. But definitely, you know, what you said is moving there and kind of starting a new life was not how I expected to move forward. But I think there was a lot of different factors. You know, one was I didn't put myself out there and apply to a lot of different jobs. You know, I put my eggs in one basket and I had this direction. And to be honest, it would have been a lot of work to go in a different direction. And there's probably a little bit of laziness involved in that, honestly and personally. Not that I recommend that, but it is what it is. But in addition, I felt like I wanted to branch out a little bit. I had been in California my whole life, and you know, there's a lot of great work going on in California in the energy space. I mean, it's really pushing the boundaries as far as energy efficiency and sustainability go. But there's a whole other country out there, and there's just a larger impact that can be made. And I felt like I wanted to learn a little bit more and put myself out of my comfort zone. So,
You may want to mention you're back here now.
oh yeah.
Yeah, so he got back to California.
It's funny when Ben told me about the internship, he said, you know, go spend a few years in Bentonville and then come back. I never expected that to happen, but that happened.
So I would say, I think you mentioned this in your presentation, Dash, like money and career advancement are great and you should pursue them, but they're certainly not everything. You know, are you working in a job that is fulfilling on other metrics? Like, are you enjoying it? Is the actual work itself good, positive? Are you making contributions? Like, you have to think about how mission driven are you? Do you want to work on a specific sort of societal challenge or specific issue? You have to think about the boss that you might work with, the coworkers you might work with, what are the tasks in that job? And I think in my experience, even early in my career when I didn't have a great salary, I wouldn't have traded a higher salary for worse conditions because you're there in that job 8 to 10 hours a day. You really want to make it good, positive, and enjoyable and feel like you're contributing value. I think my career track is a little bit more haphazard maybe. I've focused, I think at least the last 7 or 8 years, I've known that decarbonization and decarbonization through the electric sector is going to be my career focus. And that's, in some ways, it's helped guide my direction. In other ways, it constrains, it limits the types of jobs and sort of organizations that I would work for. So I would say my experience has been pretty unplanned. I didn't know when I got into the legislature where I'd be going. When I got to Edison, I didn't know that I'd do grad school, and I went to grad school. It was very much like, let's follow this path and see what comes out of it. And I think at the end of the day, if you do good work, try to get to know your network, whether it's in your organization, adjacent to your organization, your jobs will come up. You don't necessarily need to worry, oh my God, I have to do exactly this so that I can get to here. You do if you want to be a faculty member, that's a different conversation. But in the real world, outside of academia,
We are the real world.
the corporate world, I would say, you don't have to worry about your track. Just do good work, make sure you're working for people who support you, and things will come your way.
I want to elaborate a little bit on that. You know, there's a common saying that you don't leave your job, you leave your manager. And I mean, I've learned that to be very true. I mean, I've probably had one bad manager at my time at Walmart, and but otherwise, you know, great folks that, you know, let you do what you want to do to a certain extent, right? I mean, no micromanagement, and give you the opportunity. And I think it's also about work culture. You know, a lot of places, I think it's important for jobs to always have a growth track. I think, you know, if a manager's not giving you a growth track, or if your job's not giving you a growth track, then it's not a place that you want to be in. And I feel like sometimes that takes some hits and misses to find a good place. And sometimes it happens first time. So just take that into consideration when you're figuring out exactly what you want to do.
John?
Yeah, just kind of a theme that came up in both of your stories was sort of taking risks and doing things that you were totally unqualified to do. And that's something that I feel like is a common refrain in people who have like had successful careers. But I just kind of wonder, is there like a survivor bias there? You know, I mean, have you had an experience where you took a risk, you did something that you weren't qualified to do, and you totally failed and it backfired, but overall the progress works, or is it just that it's always worked out for you?
There's definitely a selection bias, I think. You have to ask my twin. I can't really think of a risk that really, I mean, even things that didn't work out great. So speaking of like bad managers, I had an experience, I won't go into details, where I had a really, really bad manager in an environment, and that wasn't fun for the year or 18 months. But at the same time, I was doing really interesting projects, kind of finding ways to work around that, and the situation ultimately resolved itself, and that person left, right? And I don't want to go into details, I'm not trying to out anyone on this live recording, but increasingly there are tools and HR organizations for that specific type of incident where you can deal with that stuff. I know nothing's perfect, and a lot of organizations where that effort will fail, but I think there's a growing effort to try to help employees resolve issues with challenging organizational structures. But I would say even the failures and risks that don't work out, they're not career enders, right? Like, I could think of big failures that might end my career. They're not going to just happen if I take one job versus the other. There might be an opportunity cost that I miss this other job opportunity or something like that. But I don't think that the downside risk is usually smaller than you imagine.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I don't think there was any massive failure that I had to kind of come back from. There's initiatives that I was involved in that didn't end up working out. But to your point, it's a failure in your career isn't an end to your career. My mom's a 4th grade teacher, and she has parents that are freaking out that their kid gets a B or a C and thinks that they're not going to do anything with their life. And I feel like that's fully inappropriate. And it's definitely a little bit more appropriate to freak out when something happens in your career. But you should always keep in mind that, again, it's not an ender. There's always going to be another path forward. And at Walmart, we often try to fail fast so we can get to that success point. I don't always agree with that policy, but I think in general, it's important to keep that in mind, that there's always a path forward, regardless of which direction things go.
So versus school, you have a twin. I also have a twin.
I don't really have a twin.
Okay.
Or maybe that was the survivorship bias was a long time.
But to my actual question, so I think because I'm a first year and it's still really early on, that I'm dealing with a lot of like self-doubt, I guess, and I don't know. I think it's just because I can't see the end right now. But I guess how did you both deal with that, knowing that you're at the end of your grad school?
Yeah, so I have always felt that, let me rephrase that, coming into grad school in particular, as I mentioned before, I was like a policy know-nothing, and I came in and they were asking me to do math, and that was hard, and I didn't like it. Actually, I liked it a lot, but it was a hard thing to get back into, and the whole time I was like, what am I doing? I'm gonna fail every course. John knows this. I thought every ARE course you're gonna take, like halfway through the quarter, I was like, I might have to bail on grad school because I'm gonna fail this course. I'm like, we literally every quarter we're in together. But then I looked around and said, everybody is just figuring it out. Everybody's got that imposter syndrome. Everybody doesn't know what they're doing. And yeah, maybe some people are gonna have some skills that are stronger than yours going in. You're gonna have other skills that are stronger than theirs going in. And if you try, and if you ever feel like, oh man, I'm gonna fail, go talk to your professor or your advisor and say, man, this is hard. Can you give me some advice, or can you help me think about some resources? Like, I think that you're not alone, and feel comforted in the fact that internally we all constantly are doubting ourselves and always are in that position of thinking, oh wow, I'm really unqualified for this. But so is everybody else. So, hopefully that's helpful.
I would say don't worry about it too much. I mean, sometimes it's just natural to get into that mindset and figure out, what am I going to do? I really don't know what I want to do, but in the end, just if you're in that situation, just start off like one step at a time. Try to find some opportunities. And even if you go out there and try for 20 opportunities and one clicks, that could be the one that sets you up for success. And I feel like, especially in the energy sector right now, there's so many jobs and there's so many cool things that are going on, and there's definitely high demand. And I don't think it's going to be a problem for folks to get out there and find something that they really want to do.
So I have a question. She asked about the beginning of grad school, so I'm at the end. I'm hopefully graduating in June, and so I'm on the job market. And so I'm a sociology PhD, and I want to get into like regulatory affairs, public policy arena. And it seems like what I can tell from looking at other people's like LinkedIn's, like everyone kind of did that like low paid legislative aid job. And I would like to avoid having to do that. Just being like older and having been in school for so long, like I need to start like recouping that investment faster because anyway, all that fun stuff. So it's like, do you have any advice about like how to kind of like make that jump ahead? Like how do I leverage a PhD that I have? Like I'm not necessarily like Green Hills, like I know how to do statistical analysis, like I have all these skills, but it's in an area that people don't usually look for in the energy sector. And so I'm having a hard time getting past like the initial gatekeepers to like have a like more in-depth conversation of like, here's like why I'm relevant and have all these skills that you don't think you need, but you need. So giving advice about like kind of how to jump in, or like I'm toying with like going to work for like the PUC for a couple of years, like to be a regulator before being like representing a company to the regulators.
Yeah, I think that's the right pathway. I think there's two kind of areas I would think of, and they have slightly different cultures around this. So if you want to work like legislature, legislative, like the fellowship I described, or the science fellowship, the CCSD fellowship, there's a very strong culture of like groveling and like thou shalt be a bottom of the barrel person for a while and get paid, I don't know if people get paid now, but not very much money, enough to live on for a year or two, but not like a career. But at the same time, you get paid in a ton of exposure to a broad network. You get paid in really interesting work, engagement with the community, et cetera. That's, I think, really invaluable. The regulatory side is a little bit distinct. I think in regulatory, if you're going to work for a commission, Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, or ARB is kind of main energy agencies, you'll probably come in at a slightly higher pay grade, but you're going to miss, more likely than not, you won't have nearly as much external exposure and sort of portfolio as you do because they're better staffed at the agencies. That's not to say it's not a great pathway. Tons of people started their careers, particularly at the Public Utilities Commission or the CEC, building that career and working and doing awesome analytical work on really interesting projects. It's just usually a slower sort of progress path that, because it's a big, they tend to be larger bureaucracies. But I very strongly consider PUC, particularly coming out of grad school, coming out of the legislature, it's an amazing place to learn. I would also encourage ARB and CEC as great options, depending on where you want to be. But there are a few shortcuts, I would say, in this process.
I'm curious if, not necessarily if you would have done anything differently, but if you could sort of like look into a parallel universe where you would have made a different decision at some point. If there's anything that you look back on and you're kind of like, I wonder what would have happened if I would have done this instead. Or like even other sectors that you think would have been interesting to go into.
I think if I wasn't here in energy, I would probably be in waste issues and like microplastics, ocean pollution, some other sort of part of the environmental space. In terms of career stops, I don't think there's anything I would totally have done differently other than maybe worked harder in undergrad. I feel like I learned all the things in econ and elsewhere that I should have learned in undergrad and grad school because I failed to learn them the first time. And I would have finished my ag econ degree. Maybe I will someday.
Never too late.
I'd like to come back, but each passing quarter, I know less that I need for the final exam, so we'll see.
I would say the same thing, work harder in undergrad. I gotta be honest, I wasn't that into like electrical engineering back then. And even though I got really into power and power systems after I started my job, I had to relearn everything. And that was not a fun process. It's just a lot of time spent, reading books, reviewing all my course material. So I feel like sometimes you may not see all the value in what you're learning. Some classes may seem useless, but I think in the end, it's safer and better to learn that information when you have the chance and the time to do that.
And find out from each other and from alumni, what are the classes that are not to be missed?
Yeah.
Right? I can give you, they were all great, but I could probably give you the 5 or 6 that were, absolutely phenomenal and really built up certain specific skill sets.
And I think one of my favorite classes I took here was journalism.
Interesting.
I took that one too.
Yeah,
It's really
who
good.
the professor was, but he was cool.
The SAC-B guy,
Yeah,
right?
SAC-B guy.
Yeah.
So
really good.
That was on undergrad, right?
Yeah, it's still worth taking though.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's fun.
Sandesh, this question is for you. You said that you spent most of your life living in California and that, when you're going out to Bentonville, Arkansas is very different. I was curious, one of the things that we kind of talk about a lot here is like, how do we make sure we're not just focusing on California-specific issues. And I wonder, since you work for a company headquartered in Arkansas that has locations all around the country, you've probably traveled to different stores in a lot of different types of communities. If there's any particular perspectives or other things that you've heard or experienced in your time that may be valuable for us to think about in the energy space, that, you know, is not just a California-centric view.
I don't want to get too political here. But yeah, I have been fortunate enough to travel quite a bit and visit different sites and different cities and meet, you know, folks who work in stores, customers, and you know, of all different tracks of life. And the one thing that I learned just living in Arkansas for a while is that people are people, and you know, just because someone holds a different set of beliefs than you, it's not always done in spite. It's often just how people were raised, the perspectives they were raised by their parents, and it's not. I feel like keeping an open mind when talking to folks, whether it's on the, you know, the business side about energy or whether it's on the personal side, I think is probably the most important piece that I've learned. And I think it really goes both ways. A lot of people over there are incredibly closed-minded to folks in California. They say that we're in a bubble, and we say that that area isn't a bubble. And, you know, there's a lot of different personalities out there, and I think in the end, it's important to give everyone a chance and have a conversation.
I can share my course list if folks want that. Just going back to you mentally. So on the soft skills side, I would say Alyssa's class, LC, I know you're all required to take it, but lean into that course. You get so much opportunity to work in teams, organize a project, define it yourself, super valuable. I would say all the other ed courses in that vein, like the Gen course where you do a project, the energy systems course where you do a project, super huge. Really lean into that team project. I know it's hard in the quarter, you're getting to the end and you've got all these different finals. You might have teammates who are, you know, doing a lot of it. It's nothing more valuable than getting those organizational skills. And the other soft skills course is I don't recall the name, Ben, but the MBA sustainability course. Presenting once a week, dealing with different problems, dealing with different people, building your network, so valuable. Can't recommend those two enough on the soft skills. On the hard skill side, data analysis. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to find a person in most organizations who can like do simple database joining or like very simple data analysis. And if you can do that, you're like a wizard. Like, I know nothing about data science, and I'm a total wizard in the eyes of all my colleagues. And then I hired a person who is like the Gandalf, and he's like halfway through his PhD. And we're both smart people, but we're by no means data scientists. So learn that, do it either through your GSR or do the intro to R course that Debbie Meyer used to teach you.
Yeah, we don't have
Okay,
it offered
okay,
right now,
some coding course.
but
really
Alan Jen
fantastic.
offers the data analysis.
Yeah, I didn't take Alan's, but I took it when Alan and Chris did it together. Really worthwhile. And then I would say the graduate micro econ series is the like famed terrible Pierre Morel class. So helpful, particularly for environmental economics, as well as the Kevin Novin environmental ag econ class. And then Jim Bushnell's, I think it's kind of integrated in the seminar now, but his undergraduate energy course is really good. That's my hot list. There's probably some I'm forgetting, but each of those I think back as skills development that I use all the time.
One echo that data science means you don't have to be an expert, but just understanding trends, being able to see that and understanding what's possible, even if you don't know exactly how to get there, I think is important.
I have a last question for you. What's next? You all are youngins. Like, what are your next goals? What do you hope to move forward and continue doing and shift and change? If you haven't thought about that, that's fine.
So I'm actually in the process of applying for an MBA. Hopefully want to start fall of 2020. And yeah, that's really what I'm thinking is next. I'm hoping to continue working for Walmart while I do my MBA, but we'll see. And after that, who knows?
So I'm recently in a new job. I don't have any plans on leaving anytime soon, but I'm really excited about what we as the CCA community need to do and will be doing to build ourselves up to really take a stronger leadership role in the decarbonization transition. So that means building up our internal institutions around resource modeling, reliability planning, basically figuring out this next phase of decarbonization and renewable opportunity there. I would invite all of you to apply for jobs when you graduate or want to do internships. We need a lot of smart people, and particularly people with technical backgrounds. So I'm really excited about doing that over the next couple of years.
Thank you.
So I think Sandesh actually holds the record for latest nights spent working in this building. And I'm sure he would be delighted if that record gets broken at some point over the next few years for you guys, as you're cranking on your studies. Not to say that you should not have a good work-life balance. Sandesh currently owns that record.
What's the time?
Sandesh, you want to bring up your spreadsheet for all
Oh,
the time?
spreadsheet now.
Yeah.
I think in the early stages of Prop 39, I was here with Siva and some other folks until like 2, 3 a.m. I mean, that's probably not that late for normal college life, but being in this room, like literally this room, after Dutch Bros run coffee, was pretty invigorating.